Recorded Books Inspirational presents an unabridged recording of The Resurrection File by Craig Parshall, narrated by Alan Nebelthau. This book is copyrighted 2002 by Craig L. Parshall. This recording is copyrighted 2003 by Recorded Books. Depressed, down on his luck, and dropped by his law partners, Will Chambers is an attorney whose troubles are starting to exceed even his considerable talents. When Reverend Angus MacCameron asks Chambers to defend him against accusations that might destroy not only the man's ministry, but the very foundation of the Christian faith, everything in Chambers' non-believing heart says, "Run away." And now, The Resurrection File.
Chapter 1. Monroeville, Virginia, in the near future. Will Chambers was late again. For the last year or so, the 40-year-old attorney had been getting to his law office late almost every day. This morning, his head felt like it had been pressed in a trash compactor. Coping with a hangover was part of Chambers' daily routine. Today, like most days, he was recovering from his liquid diet of Jack Daniels. He had spent the last night in the usual manner, sitting alone in the great room of his empty, half-restored pre-Civil War mansion, listening to music and drinking himself numb. He would drink until things hurt a little less for a while, and his personal demons were a little more fuzzy and a little less distracting. And he would fall asleep in his chair with his golden retriever lying next to him on the floor. Then, about 2 or 3 in the morning, he would awaken, stumble up the winding staircase, and fall into bed. Clarence, his big dog, would pad up the stairs close behind and bound onto the bed next to him. This morning, amid the hammering inside his head, Chambers suddenly remembered that he had to be in court. He was grabbing around his cluttered office trying to locate his case file when Betty, his secretary, yelled for him around the corner. Chambers walked into her area. A lit cigarette was hanging out of Betty's mouth. "Will," she said in an exasperated voice, "you've got to get going. You're going to be late for court." Will took 2 fingers and snatched the cigarette from her lips, crushing it out on a message pad at her desk. "This is a non-smoking office, Betty," he said. "Geez, you know that." Betty's eyes narrowed. "You're going to be late for court. Have a nice day." The lawyer looked at his watch and saw that he might not make it to the Central Virginia Federal Court on time. He stopped for a split second to examine the framed photograph of his wife that was prominently displayed on his bookshelf. He stared at the pretty face in the photograph, then carefully placed it back on the shelf. For a moment, he felt the old, buried sorrow clawing once again to the surface. A noise outside jolted him back, and he grabbed his briefcase, picked up his suit coat, and dashed down the stairs, his almost shoulder-length hair flying wildly behind him. When Will reached the street below, he crossed it in a run, heading to his red-and-white 1957 Corvette convertible. There was a yellow parking ticket stuck underneath his windshield wiper, which he didn't bother to retrieve. He leaped into the driver's seat, tossing the briefcase to the seat next to him, and in one continuous motion started the car and wheeled it around in a half-circle, cutting off a tour bus driver. By the time Will had swung his car around by the front of his building, Betty had bolted out of the front door. She was waving the case file above her head that Will Chambers had forgotten. Will slowed his car down and motioned for her to toss it into the moving Corvette. With a lunge, she threw the thick brown folder onto the passenger seat. Will waved at her without looking back as he gunned the engine and accelerated out of sight, the yellow parking ticket flapping wildly underneath the windshield wiper.